Hi, everyone. This is Allison Vorsatz. I'm a Senior Enterprise Director here at Fairy Godboss, and I have the absolute honor and privilege of being with our famous author today, Jennifer Petriglieri, and she has written an outstanding book called Couples That Work that really focuses on how dual career couples can thrive in love and work, an issue that many of us are dealing with at different stages in our career and trying to find the balance of how to support partners in their career, how to support family obligations, households, and to find a way to make it a synergy and have everyone be successful and happy with the outcome. So Jennifer, thank you for joining us. Would you like to do
with you all?
We're so happy to have you here. Would you like to start with the introduction and maybe what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so like many of your listeners, I'm guessing I'm part of a working couple myself. I'm an academic, my husband is as well. We have 2 kids. And like many of us, I struggled with like, how do we combine our careers and our lives and have a great relationship and kind of keep sane along the way? And as an academic, I was really interested, well, there's got to be some research out there to help me. And, you know, I looked and really found nothing. So there's a lot of research around work-life balance, i.e. who does the laundry. But that's really not the issue most couples are struggling with. It's much more complex than that. And there's nothing out there looking at how our careers interact and our lives holistically. So I thought, well, if no one's done that research, I'm going to do that. And so here I am today.
I love it. Thank you for being the one to pioneer this space because so many of us have questions about this and struggle with this constantly. So in the book, you talk about the 3 most fraught stages of a working couple's relationship and the traps that these couples fall into at different stages. So the first piece is when couples decide to combine their lives. The second is when they need to figure out what they want to do next professionally, and then how they want to wind down in their later years. And then, of course, figuring out how family and travel and relocation and balance fit into all of these things. So what are some of the common mistakes you think that couples make at each of these different stages?
Yeah, I'll take the early stage first because I think it's a stage we all go through, and the common mistakes can impact the rest of us right through our career span. So even if you're past that early stage now, some of these mistakes have probably kind of bitten you. And the biggest mistake we make in our early years when we're combining our lives is to look at things too practically. Right, so we'll make decisions based on money, on location, on childcare. Now, all these things are important, but they're not the most important thing at this stage. When we're trying to combine our lives, what we really need to negotiate are things like whose career takes priority, who has the power to decide, how are we going to support each other, what do we really want, what are our ambitions? And unless we negotiate and agree these foundations of our relationship, no amount of syncing our Google calendars and dividing up chores is going to help us. And that's a big trap couples fall into in those early years.
And then how does it change as the stages change through age? Like let's say, for example, a family is starting to combine, but the couple is in their late 50s. And so now they're trying to figure out, maybe they're in the early stage of combining, but they already have children in the mix and they have established careers. And how does that work differently?
Yeah, I think when we're, you know, in those early years, our 20s, 30s, and maybe our early 40s as well, we're really trying to establish ourselves, right? We're growing our career, we're building our career, we're building a relationship. Some of us are building a family as well. As we get a little bit older, mid to late 40s and beyond, we tend to be more preoccupied with questions of direction. You know, what do I really want from life? Now I've got on the ladder and I've got a little bit of success. Is this really the direction? These questions of direction and purpose come up. And these can be pretty fraught for couples because often when we start wrestling with these almost more existential questions, right? What is the direction I want my life to go in? What would make a good life? We need a different kind of support from our partner. In our early years, we tend to need that sort of loving cuddle support, right? We plump up each other's self-esteem, we make each other feel good about ourselves, and that feels wonderful. But as we hit the stage I'm at now, mid-40s and beyond, and we start to wrestle with these slightly more existential questions, these deeper questions, we really need a slightly different type of support, which is what I call in the book a secure-based support, which means, yes, we have that kind of loving safety, but there's also a push away from our comfort zone to say, you know, time is not fine. You know, time is finite. Right. We've not got all the time in the world. You know, we've not got that much of a career span yet left. If we're going to wrestle with these issues, you need to get out there. You need to explore. You need to experiment. And so the kind of way we support each other needs to shift at this period of life. And couples who make that shift in support really can go through a period of renewal in their relationship and their careers. But couples who don't, two things tend to happen. Either they stagnate, or they can start to feel a little bit suffocated by their relationship, right? I'm too much in this comfort zone, it's too close, like I'm missing some excitement.
And I feel like a lot of couples deal with the latter. It's really hard to change the dynamic of your relationship, especially if you've been together a long time. So what tools do you think they can work on, or what suggestions would you give them?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because essentially what happens is if I start questioning my path, I'm questioning our joint path, and that's threatening, right, to my partner. And that, the alarm bells ring, and we try and pull our partners back to that safety net. And the real key here is supporting our partner's exploration. Now, what does that mean in practice? It can mean a whole range of things, but it's essentially about supporting our partner to go out of our comfort zone. So resisting the temptation to kind of keep them in that role, that model we've got, and looking at alternatives. Now, sometimes when I say that, people think like, oh my goodness, this is a huge transition. And it's like about, I don't know, setting up a stall selling cupcakes. There's nothing wrong with selling cupcakes, by the way. But for many people, it's not such a huge, drastic transition,
right?
But it's more of a reorientation, but it doesn't make it any less important. And I think encouraging your partner sort of out of that safety zone and into anything from kind of networking to reading different books, to talking to different people, to experimenting through little sabbaticals or side projects, all of these things are really helpful at this stage.
Yeah, I think there's been such a constant struggle with thinking that you choose a path, you're supposed to stay on it. And even the smallest shift, like choosing to move from a management role back to an individual contributor, can be terribly difficult to make that decision and, fret with so much worry and concern that you're not on the right path anymore.
And I think this is where our models have got to shift for two reasons. One is our careers are lengthening, right? Our lifespan is lengthening and our career span is lengthening. And the thought that over a 50-year career, you will stay on the same path, it just doesn't make logical sense. And we know from the data as well, most people are going to make at least 3 or 4 relatively significant transitions in their career span. And I think in our couples, we've got to get set up for that. Now, of course, there are some times that are better to make a transition than others. We can all think of pinch times. For example, new babies just arrived. That's a tough time to manage a transition. It's not to say you should never do it. But there are sometimes better than others, but we need to build in an expectation into our couples that transitions are the norm. And part of our role as a good partner is to support our partner in their transitions.
I love that. Building in the concept that transitions are the norm instead of the outlier. It makes people lose some of the fear and create more of an idea that this is part of life that everyone adjusts to, as opposed to I'm alone right now trying to figure out how to balance my new career choice in life.
I also think it's about thinking of our relationship in terms of transitions as well. I was talking to a journalist the other day, and she said this really interesting thing. She said, I read your book, and I felt like the 3 transitions were times we built 3 new relationships. Now, for some of us, that's 3 new relationships with the same person. Obviously, not for everybody.
Right.
But yeah, I think it spoke to me of 2 things. One is the potential in the transitions to really build a new path in our relationship, and also the work that takes, right? It's not about just sitting on our laurels and carrying on the train. It's about really making an active choice. What do we want out of our relationship? How are we going to support each other? And then let's shift paths to get that.
This is an art form to be able to do this well. I feel like to be able to take your partner's considerations in, yours, to integrate family. And I think there's been a lot of talk about work-life balance, and it doesn't seem achievable sometimes that there's going to be balance. But what do you think about work-life balance? Is this a myth? Are we holding people to standards they think they're not going to achieve to be able to have the perfect career and the perfect relationship and the balanced home life, and to be able to make for the events of children and all those types of things?
Yeah, I have to say, I think this work-life balance narrative is one of the most damaging things that has come out in the last 10, 15 years, especially for women, actually.
Yeah.
So, we see this narrative around this perfectly balanced life where we have this great career and amazing relationship and these kids who are never sick and completely perfect, and we're having sex all the time and we're amazing cooks and we have these circle of friends. I mean, no one's life is like this. But the problem with this image is so many people, we look at it and we think, oh, my life isn't like that. There's something wrong with me and there's something wrong with my relationship. No, you are just normal. And what I found in my research is the people who were really struggling and said, Jennifer, I'm really struggling with work-life balance. When we got down to it, what they were really struggling with was, what do I really want? Because when we look at that picture postcard image and really sit down and think, do I really want all of those things? Or am I being made to think I want them? The answer for most people is no. Actually, there are a couple, 2 or 3 of those things that are really important to me. So for people with careers, it tends to be the career, the relationship, and, kids if we have them, and maybe one hobby. But the other things are nice to have, but, that's not really important for me. And I think we've got to get away from this idea of work-life balance and more to the idea of, how do we craft a life that works for us? And for you, that balance may be very different from me, but as long as it works for you and your couple, that's good.
Yeah, one of the things I love that you covered in the book is this idea that we have to do it all. Make a list of the things that you have to do or that you want to do and what you can outsource. Like if you don't want to go to the grocery store and you want to order groceries from Fresh Direct, and that's something you choose to do and you're saving an hour or 2 a week, make that choice, and not having to feel like the bathtub always has to be clean and there always has to be a home cooked meal. And it's just not possible to do it all.
I think so. And I think there's 2 sides to this. I think one is we need to be easier on ourselves. Yeah. And the other, I think we need to claim those things that are genuinely important to us. So I remember talking to one couple, and they were actually a very successful couple. And I, and she ran a not-for-profit actually. And I said, she said, tell me about your life. And she said, well, every Sunday night I sit down and my little ritual is to iron my husband's shirts for the week. And I was like, this woman could afford all the ironing in the world.
Right.
And as someone who absolutely hates ironing, I was thinking, what is she up to? And she also was someone who had a lot of home help, right? And I said, why is that? And she said, well, it's just a really important piece of who I am. It's like, it's very important to me. Likewise, I'm someone, I love to cook and bake. No one is baking my children's birthday cakes for them apart from me. But if you're not a cooker or baker, why would you do that? It doesn't make sense. And so I think we need to be better at both claiming those things we love and saying, this is really important to me. And for the other stuff, saying, you know what, if someone else does it, that's just fine.
Yeah, I loved that example when you touched on that, because I feel the same way about cooking. For example, I find cooking really therapeutic. I have other friends that find cooking a nightmare. It's like too much stress, it's too much work, it's too much cleanup, it's too much time. And so focus on the things that bring you the joy and figure out what you can do with the other ones, and also how often you need to do them.
Yeah.
And it may not be as often as society expects.
Probably not.
Then the other thing I really thought was interesting in the book is kind of this concept of gender roles as well. And we've seen a lot of studies where even women who are the primary breadwinner, they do more of the housework. They care for the children at a higher level. They have more of the responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And our society is still adjusting to this idea that in a dual relationship, regardless of gender, that maybe the person that presents a certain way doesn't have to be the person that picks up the kid at school, or that doesn't have to make all the money. And so what do you think about that, and how as a society we can kind of alter those expectations and allow space for people to be comfortable to do what works for them?
Yeah. And I love the way you frame it, because this happens even when couples themselves are deeply committed to equality. So it's not just about our partner being lazy. What happens is the social pressure is enormous to push us into certain roles. And I think it's a responsibility of all of us to push back on this. And the tactic that seems to work best for couples is a kind of divide and conquer tactic. So let me give you a personal example. My husband actually trained as a medical doctor. He's not a medical doctor now, but he takes care of everything health related for the kids, the dentist, the doctors, the vaccination schedules. And because it's always him, they don't call me, right? But I know if I went once or twice, they would be calling me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's the norm. But they maybe don't even know the kids have a mother, right? Because I'm never there at the doctor's visit. I'm never there at the dentist. And this tactic actually seems to work pretty well for couples, to try and break those gender norms, to not give people the option to default to the woman in the relationship. So this is a tactic that works quite well, and also about just challenging people on it, honestly, because I think most people genuinely do this in an unconscious, unthinking way. They're not thinking, you as the mother should be doing this. They're just assuming that you as the mother would do this. And so to gently challenge, we can actually shift these dynamics in our little environment quite quickly. And you're right, the statistics still show that women do a lot more than men around the house in heterosexual couples. However, the statistics also show that it is balancing out. Even over the last decade, it's shifted quite a bit. Now, it's not at parity, but the trend is really going in that direction. So we're definitely on the journey. And I think it's all of us to kind of make sure we get there.
Yeah. And we also have to make space for same-sex couples and single parents to be able to be seen as competent in all of the roles and to have that opportunity as well. So I think that's something we need to work on as a society.
Yeah.
I also really liked when you said, it's not that your partner's lazy. I read the concept of, coming from a place of kindness, and that this idea that when you can say like, oh, the person didn't pick up the things from the dry cleaner they were supposed to, instead of saying, oh, they probably didn't get to it or they didn't care, it wasn't a priority, understanding that maybe they had a busy day at work, or maybe it just slipped their mind because we have so much going on right now. Like the dry cleaning will still be there tomorrow. Everything will survive. So how would you recommend couples, try to facilitate that from a place of kindness, especially if they're in a relationship that it's a lot of, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and I had to do this because you didn't do it.
So, I mean, over the long term, we know from decades of research that kindness is the thing which predicts survival of relationships. And when we think of kindness, we tend to think of doing something kind. So I buy you a little gift, or maybe I let you sleep in, or something like this. That's great. We all love that. But the kindness that matters is exactly what which you just talked about, which is thinking kindly of your partner. Like, do I attribute that you're lazy and you're a layabout and you couldn't care less? Or do I attribute you probably had a hard day's work, and this was just a little slip up, and it doesn't say anything about your caring for family. And that's really hard, especially if you're in a period of your life when it's really busy. Yeah. So take that time if you have small children, for an example, or if you have teenagers who are having trouble at school, or if you're in a really busy career phase. It's very hard to maintain that kind of kindness. However, it's the kind of kindness that we mirror, that we psychologically mirror. And so it's the sort of thing that if you start displaying it to your partner, it's very likely that they will do it back to you. So it's about thinking, okay, can I keep reminding myself that, actually my partner is a decent person. They love me. They have good intentions.
Yeah.
Given that, how would I want to be treated? And it's very likely that that mirroring effect will happen quite quickly. So you'll be rewarded.
I think that's really important because, as you said, when you get really busy, when there's a lot of stress, when there's a lot of balls up in the air, it's very easy to get frustrated and accusatory about who's doing what. Okay. And it's going to be a vicious cycle of people then coming back and being frustrated with you. Yeah. And so taking that time to do that. And, one of the things I loved about your story is the idea of this couple contract and having to relook at it, of course, as your lives evolve and change and grow. So when you think about that, what are some tips or advice you would offer to couples around how to create a contract that works for both of you?
Yeah. So first of all, when I say a contract, I don't mean a legal contract that we sort of cut our wrists and sign in blood. It's really more of a psychological contract. And it's essentially conversations that are about the principles of our relationship rather than the practicalities. Now, I think sometimes when people hear like deep conversations, the alarm bells ring like, oh my God, this is going to be really emotional and my partner will not want to go there and we're going to need 5 hours to talk about it. No. All you need is, end of the day or with kids are in bed, a nice cup of tea sat on the sofa and a conversation around 3 areas. The first is to develop a really deep understanding of what really matters to each other. What are your values? What are your ambitions? What would make life worthwhile for you? Now, this is not like a 5-year career plan, right? In 2 years, we're going to do this, and in 3 years that. No, it's about what do we want out of life? What are the yardsticks we're going to measure our life? So some of them will be professional for those of us who are into careers, right? So for me personally, I really wanted to write a book, and I knew that if I didn't, I would be disappointed in myself, right? It was something that was really important to me. It wasn't about when I did it or anything like that, but that was something professionally really important to me. For some people, that might be some kind of progression. For others, it might be learning a new skill. But to understand what that is about your partner is really important, because what I found time and time again is when couples failed, they actually didn't fail because they weren't supporting each other. They failed because they didn't understand what it was they were supposed to support.
Yeah.
So they were very genuinely, with best intentions, trying to support each other, but they were pushing in the wrong way and often in opposite directions. And it was ever so sad that time and time again, it wasn't that one had become indifferent or one was cheating on the other, or of course that occasionally happens. It was really that they just didn't understand what really mattered to each other. So this, just spending some time at the end of the day, and again, not every day, sort of once in a while, how are things going? What direction are you going in? Some people call it ambition, some people call it goals, some people call it values, whatever those words work for you. But it's essentially about what really matters and how can I support you in getting there is really the key. The second thing that's very helpful for couples is to talk around what are the lines we're not going to cross. And this is really important because as we get busy in our lives, we can enter that sort of boiling frog syndrome, if I can put it like that. That idea. So let's take the idea of work travel, right? We're both working busy lives. Maybe we've got kids at home and we both start to travel a little bit with work. And at the beginning, it's fine, but then we travel a little bit more and a little bit more. And suddenly, we're having blow-ups at work. Now, how do we prevent that? We prevent that by having a discussion up front around what is the line we just cannot cross. And that might be about work travel. If you do more than 15, 20% work travel, it just can't work for our family. It could be around location. You're based on the West Coast. What if your partner gets offered a job on the East Coast? Is that doable? Is that out of bounds? What about somewhere in the middle, right? Where is the geographical boundary? It might also be about time working. How many hours a week is too much? Now, of course, we all have weeks we need to put in the extra effort. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking, if your partner is very regularly overworking, what does that mean for you? The reason these boundaries are really helpful for couples is they sort of define the field we're going to play on. They define the playing field. And once we know that, it's easier to look at an opportunity we have and say, is it in or out? It's much easier to make choices. So that's the second thing. And the final thing is talking about the things we're worried about, the things we're concerned about. And it's surprising how often couples keep this from each other. And very often what happens when we keep it from each other is we imagine things that are not really real, right? We walk ourselves into this frenzy, this is going to happen and they're going to take a job on the East Coast and then how am I going to manage this? And we voice it to our partner and they say, that's not what I want.
Right.
So it's so important we share those little fears, those things that are niggling us, so we can rationally talk them through. And, is this really something we need to worry about? Or is this something I can put to the back of my mind? And so a contract is really talking about those areas, over time, repeatedly, to build an understanding of what do we want, how can we support each other, and how can we make sure the decisions we make are stacking up with those things rather than taking us off in a direction we don't want to go in.
So we can spend our energy in the right places at the end of it and not spin.
Because so often I would talk to couples and they would say, I sort of woke up one morning and I just thought, I don't know how I got here. This isn't where I want to be. And it's happened to all of us, right? Life gets busy, we carry on, a year goes past, 2 years goes past, 3 years goes past, and suddenly we're way off course. And often it's not just our career, it's also our relationship. And we do that, we have that drift because we've not really clearly defined what it is that we're aiming for.
And then you're so far off of it, it's hard to get back. So
yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I could talk to you about this all day, but I do want to open this up for questions. So what is a good way to find time to do things together as a couple, traveling, for example, when both are very busy at work?
Yeah. I think you have to be really ruthless about planning that time. Now, sometimes people can think, well, it's not very romantic sort of planning, some time to have these conversations or have that special time together. But I think we need to plan those moments. We need to plan the joy, right? We need to plan these moments which are just about us. And that might be after the kids have gone to bed. That might be if we're really busy traveling. Could even be we meet up in an airport, right? And have those moments. I also think we need to get away from this idea that it has to be some amazingly special walking down a beach at sunset, holding hands, the angels are singing. We all want that, right? But it doesn't have to be that. I was talking to a colleague today and she said, my husband and I have started having dates in the car. I was like, what? So, we're at the age where we taxi our kids around a lot.
Yeah.
We've decided we're going to do it together because then we get this lovely time in the car where we can talk to each other. And she said, and it's actually surprisingly meaningful. Now, on the surface, you might think that is the most unromantic thing I've ever heard. But if it works for them, that's great. I think the message is you don't need the candlelit dinner. As long as you're finding these pockets of time where you have undivided attention, and that's the key. It's about the undivided attention. It's not necessarily about the candlelit dinner or the log fire or the beach at sunset, although those things are nice. I will not argue against those things.
I have a couple friend that plays Scrabble on Sunday nights. That's their one thing that they do. That every Sunday.
My husband proposed to me over a Scrabble game.
So there is romance in Scrabble.
There is romance in Scrabble.
Excellent. Any other questions from the audience? While we're waiting for questions to come in, one thing I do want to ask, I think part of the disconnect between people being able to share their expectations and their fears is that they have expectations that are coming to them from their companies and from their bosses and their careers. And they may not be sharing that with their partner, but when they're coming home, you're getting what's left after that day of expectations. So how do you help companies, or what suggestions would you make for companies on how they can support couples in their careers so that there isn't this disconnect and this frustration that's coming through?
Yeah, and I think one of the most frustrating things at the moment is companies have really not wised up to this trend. So if we look, 70%, more than 70% in America of the workforce are part of working couples. So this is the vast majority. And yet most companies still treat us as if we probably have a support crew at home who are going to take care of everything.
Right.
And this is a real issue for companies, and companies are actually starting to lose talent over it. And so I think, there's one thing companies can do, and there's one thing we can do to manage our companies and educate them. So the companies themselves really need to start thinking about how to differently manage people's career paths and their work practices. And I think the most important thing for working couples is some degree of what I call marginal flexibility. Now, the reason I say that is most working couples don't want traditional flexible working, i.e. 3 days a week or working from home. What they need is a little flexibility around the margins to maybe come in a bit late one day, finish a bit early, pick up again in the evenings, and to not get punished for that.
Right.
And what we find in most modern organizations is they talk a really good game of flexible working. If you do it, woe betide you, because you will be punished in terms of promotion, etc. And yet it's crazy because the research shows the opposite. The research shows that when we use these marginal flexibility, again, I'm not talking about part-time working, I'm really talking about someone having a full job, but just having a bit more scope to define when and where they work, we see people's productivity go up quite significantly. So, there's a gain for companies there. I think, given that most companies are quite behind, what can we do as individuals? So I'll tell you one thing proactively and one thing which is a bit of a trick. So there's some really good research that shows the most helpful tactic for people is to pretend we're working normally. So pretend we're this ideal worker, but actually bake flexibility into our schedule. Now, this is a bit of a sad recommendation because it's not changing the system.
Right.
But the reason this benefits us is our productivity increases, but we're not punished.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's how can we find ways, I'm going to a client meeting, I'm actually going to pick my kids up from school, or, I'm doing this project, I'm working here when, I'm taking more flexibility. This has been shown in many studies to be a very good tactic. And the other thing, of course, is to educate our bosses. And what we see here is the generational effect. So there's many more working couples in the sort of 45s and unders, and there's still quite a lot in the population above that, but less. And what that means is that many of our bosses are in that population where perhaps they do have that more traditional arrangement at home. But that doesn't mean that they're biased against us. It just means they don't get it, right? They've not lived it, they don't understand. And in my experience working with senior executives in companies, most of them are pretty open to understanding if we can sit them down and explain, what we need. We don't need huge work adjustments. We just need that little flexibility around the edges. And most bosses will actually be quite responsive if we sit down and rationally talk that through.
I think it's important, that communication line, but also realize until we can change the system, sometimes you have to play the game. So that's how that goes.
So you have to look like you're playing the game.
No.
Just look like you're playing the game and you'll be fine.
Exactly. Well, this has been so fantastic. We're actually out of time, but Jennifer, it has been such an insightful and powerful conversation. And I think that in our modern day workplace and relationships, we need to constantly be thinking about, how do we make this work? How do we support our partners, our families, our households, and really understanding what tools we have. So thank you for sharing your insight, your wisdom, the tools. For anyone that would like to learn more about this, and I really enjoyed reading this book so much, you can find it, Couples That Work by Jennifer Petriglieri, and really take some time to think about how you can be the person that has the career that they want and the relationship they want, and continue to evolve over your life with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day.